We are in the middle of our major refit after circumnavigating the world on Florence. Our task is to transform our sailboat from a tropical blue water cruiser to a boat suitable for the cold weather of higher latitude sailing. A major part of preparing for that is addressing how we're going to heat Florence when we're anchored in remote locations.
We are Matt and Amy, and this is Florence, our 37-foot sailboat on which we have sailed over 50,000 miles around the world. Now we are repairing and upgrading her in preparation for the next adventure, and that means a 6-month refit in the boatyard.
It is winter on the south coast of the UK, and this is Florence's home as we prepare her to set sail again in the summer. Although we're going to be sailing in the summer months, we plan to go north where we expect cold conditions, so heating is high on our priority list for the refit. In this episode, we will share the process of fitting Florence's new heater and explain our reasons for choosing it.
Now this is a job that really is preparation for going somewhere colder rather than maintenance and repairs after being somewhere warm. We've actually already got a heater on board Florence, but this hasn't really worked since we bought her 7 or so years ago. We've had it working intermittently at times, but recently just haven't been able to get it going at all. So we decided that since that's going to be such a critical thing for going north to the cold, we are actually going to replace it. And then when we looked at replacing it, this setup isn't ideal at all because the heat comes out of this heater and goes into this duct, which then ducts it through the rest of the boat, which is fine. But this duct immediately out of the heater does a 90-degree turn, then through there it then does another 90-degree turn, goes down, and then across, and then does a 180-degree turn round, then feeds through the boat where it does a whole another number of convoluted turns before it actually gets to the main cabin. And every time you go around a sharp bend, you lose a lot of heat because that heat is blasting against the side of the pipe and being lost to the surroundings rather than being taken along the pipe. So we're going to fit a new heater and we're going to mount it differently so that we have a much better route into the boat, and hopefully that will make it much more efficient and we'll have a nice warm boat when we're up in the cold north. It's also going to be nice to replace the exhaust, which has forever been giving rust streaks down the back of Florence. So this is our new heater that we're going to be installing on Florence to keep us warm in the cold weather. It's an Autotherm Air 4D. Now, we did a bunch of research before we chose this. There's a few big players in the forced air heater market. The ones you've probably heard of are Erbespacher and Webasto. But this unit from Autotherm has the same performance at a much lower price point. And the reviews are really good. These used to be made in Russia, but they're now made in Latvia, so inside the EU, and they've got all the EU approvals for use in vehicles and on boats. So we decided this was probably going to be the best bet for Florence, and then we actually approached Autotherm, and they very kindly have sent us this unit to try out on Florence. It comes with all the kit for installing it, all of the cables, and there's different kits depending on the boat size or camper van size that you're installing it in, with different amounts of ducting and numbers of outlets. We've also been given a discount code to share with you. If you use the code Florence5, you'll be able to get 5% off of everything at the UK distributor for Autotherm. It also helps us out a little bit too. One of the really important things is on the boat to go for the marine exhaust. And that's because on board you've got the exhaust within the boat. It's inside the lazarette at the back of the boat. So it needs to be sealed so you don't get any leaks and you don't get any dangerous gases coming into the boat. All of these do actually come with a carbon monoxide alarm, so can be doubly sure that we're not getting any harmful gases inside. We've gone for the comfort controller, which is a little unit that we can put inside the cabin in Florence, and that connects to the heater and allows us to control it from within here, set temperatures, tell it when to turn on and off, all of those sorts of things, but I'm sure we'll go into later when we actually get it plugged in. And we've also got from Autotherm a whole load of insulation, because even the ducting that's already in Florence isn't insulated, so we'll have been losing a lot of output of the heater to just behind cupboards and things where we don't really want it. We want to make sure it stays in the pipe until it gets out into Florence where we want it to keep us warm. I should probably explain why we've chosen a forced air heater for Florence. There are 3 main types of heating that you can have on a boat.
there's forced air heaters. There's hydronic systems, which are a bit like the central heating system in your house. You heat up water and then that gets piped around to radiators around the boat. And then the third one is a stove, which you can either feed with wood or gas or diesel. Now, obviously on Florence, we've already got some ducting routed through the boat, and that's one of the big challenges, is getting the heat throughout the boat. And since we've already got that ducting, although it's not ideal and we're going to have to improve it, that seemed the most sensible starting point for us. Hydronic systems, we'd have to put a lot more pipes through the boat and radiators, which we don't really have space for. And a stove would take up a lot of space in the saloon here, because we'd have to mount it and it would take up seating space and locker space. And that would be quite a big change. Also a chimney out the top. That would be quite a big change. And because this year's kind of like, see if we like cold weather sailing, see if we like sailing in the higher latitudes. If we decide we don't, or we want to go back to the tropics, then we'd have this stove mounted in that's kind of would then be in the way. So we decided to stick with forced air heating. A lot of people have asked if we're fitting a wood stove, and although a nice log burner looks nice at home, practically on a boat we don't think it's a brilliant idea. One, you've got to get the wood and store the wood and keep it dry. And it is not as dense a fuel source as diesel, so you need more space than you do for storing this equivalent amount of energy in diesel. So that probably means that a wood stove isn't a good idea on a boat. You can also fire stoves from gas, but when you burn gas it releases moisture, and we're going to have a moisture condensation issue anyway, so we don't want anything that's going to put more moisture into the air in the boat. And so that's why we've gone for diesel. It just makes sense, because we fill the diesel tank up to power the engine, and it also powers the heater, so there's no extra storage of a different fuel required. Down here inside the cockpit locker, I've already fitted the filter for the diesel fuel, where it comes out of the fuel tank into a filter and then through the pump that feeds it up to the heater. Now, it's quite tight fitting things on Florence. We wanted to fit the marine fuel filter so that we've got something to prevent if we get any dirty diesel in the tank, prevent that getting through and clogging up the heater. I couldn't work out where we're going to fit this, and then Amy pointed out that we could just go through the side from where the diesel tank is into the cockpit locker and fit it down in here, and actually it's easy to access if we need to turn it on and off or change the filter. And we made some boxing to go over that and protect it from being hit by anything in the cockpit locker. So now we're down in the lazarette at the back of Florence. The old heater was here, and this is the bracket for the new heater. We've epoxied on a piece of wood onto the rib that goes alongside Florence here, and then this is the bracket that actually comes with the heater. But before we did that, Amy actually got in here and gave it a clean up and repaint, so it's a lot nicer for the new kit that's going in. But the next job to do is to drill a large hole in Florence's bulkhead, because the ducting is now going to go directly from this heater and straight through this bulkhead, and it's got to be a really big hole, so it's a little bit nerve-wracking drilling it. There we go. So there's been a bit of a break in proceedings for installing the heater, because we've actually had to install a whole load of other stuff behind where it's going before we could do this. So it's actually been kind of a month since we did the last bit of heater install, and in that time we've had to fit the tow rail and fit all the bolts and fit a whole load of insulation that we wouldn't be able to get to once we've got the heater in, so it's pointless installing the heater first. But now, happily, we can install the heater down here in the lazarette at the back of Florence. So here is our heater installed on its new bracket, and we've got the exhaust curling around here and going out of a new stainless exhaust bracket on the back here that came with the kit, and we're all ready to route the ducting through that great big hole that we drilled about a month ago. Coming up to the bottom here, we've got the fuel line, and then we've got the control wire to the fuel pump, which goes the same direction as the fuel line, down to where we've got the fuel pump next to the fuel filter in the cockpit locker. And then we've got the air intake, and yeah, the control wires, the power and the control wires go along a duct, which then takes it along to where the batteries are under the quarter berth and to the control panel.
Before we can fire this up, we need to fit the new ducting from the heater to meet up with our existing ducting. We're adding insulation to both the existing and the new ducting to improve the efficiency of our heating system.
Need a tiny bit more. So with all the ducting in and insulated, we can now move on to fitting the control electronics for this. So we've got the comfort controller and we're going to fit it here. This is where the old heater controls were, but there have been so many different ones fitted over the years that this was a complete and utter mess. So we just fitted a piece of wood over the top that we can then screw this onto. Okay, so getting ready to try and test this heater. First thing to do is to enable the fuel flow by undoing this valve on the top of the marine fuel filter, which we installed a little while ago. I've already allowed fuel through to this to fill the bowl of the fuel filter and check there is fuel getting to the fuel pump. But we don't have any fuel between the fuel pump and the heater yet, because we haven't run the fuel pump yet. To power up the heater this first time, we're actually going to use the old engine battery. At the moment on Florence we don't have any electrical system whatsoever. We stripped it all out because we're going to be replacing it, and those parts haven't come yet. So we've still got the old engine battery here. So I'm just going to connect the heater up to it, just for the purposes of checking to see if it got it all right and it all works. So connected up to there. The heater actually comes with all the cabling and it comes with a fuse box. So that's connected up. Oh, yeah, and we've got the lights have come on the controller. Yes, ventilation, heating, temperature mode, power mode. Let's do max power. So we're just running this quickly to check it all works. We need to run it for a longer period to burn it in, but we can do that once we're outside the shed because we don't want to have too many fumes in here, but we want to make sure it works. So the first time we ran it didn't work, and we knew that it wouldn't because the fuel hadn't reached the heater. Now I'd primed the filter and there was fuel all the way to the fuel pump, but not from the fuel pump all the way up to the heater itself. So it took a couple of tries to actually get the fuel all the way from the pump up to the heater, but now it has, and we're starting to get warm air coming out. It's just a bit of a quick test to make sure things are working, and I think we can say that it is actually working. On the first couple of tries, the heater control panel did actually display a fault for the reason that it had not started, and one of the reasons for that fault was lack of fuel, so it all made sense with what we were seeing. But this is starting to get really toasty now. We've actually got 3 vents on board Florence to direct the hot air around the boat. This is the main vent, and one of them has to be permanently unblocked, permanently open, and that's what this one is. And then we've got one right up in the bow in the forepeak, which you can open and close, and one in the quarter berth down here, which you can also open and close. You have to have one that's permanently open in case you start the heater. You don't want it to have nowhere for the hot air to go. But yeah, the other ones help us direct. Maybe in the future we might add an extra one in the bathroom to try and dry that area a bit as well. That was obviously just a really quick test of the heater because we're inside the shed at the moment, so we don't want to run the diesel exhaust in here. We're really looking forward to getting out of the shed, getting sailing and testing this heater in real world conditions as we sail north to colder weather. If you're interested in fitting one of these diesel heaters yourself, then don't forget the 5% Florence 5 discount code.
The to-do list for Florence's refit is still daunting, but each job we tick off gets us one step closer to getting her back onto the water. We are longing to spread Florence's wings, to feel the wind in her sails, and to wind our way down the narrow channel back to the sea. On those days when the jobs list seems too much, we remind ourselves of why we are doing this, to prepare Florence to set sail over the horizon for new adventures. For extra updates in between these bi-weekly videos, and to find out what we're up to in real time, head over to Patreon and join the crew. Of course, don't forget to subscribe to make sure that you don't miss the next episode here on YouTube.
Continuing our voyage on Florence would not be possible without the support of our patrons. Thank you to all of you, and especially to our star patrons.